Hello everyone, Marcus here. Today I wanted to do a little video discussion kind of a thing to try to go over some of the ideas that I'm currently going through in regards to the virtual reality rig, as well as the kind of things I want to do with it, what my target goals are, and what it's probably going to end up being, as well as the time frame, since there's just a bunch of things to go over here. This is going to be a more discussional type video, since a lot of those things that are going to be discussed aren't really set in stone. They're more just brainstorming and general thoughts, some design concepts, and general theories of what you should follow and stuff like that. And overall, there's not really a firm plan right now, aside from having an idea of what the overall concept is going to be in terms of the final product, quote unquote. It's not really going to be much of a product, since I'm going to be trying to mostly just make it more specialized, but I'll go into that later on in the video. So yeah, guys, don't really expect too much editing. Don't really expect too much editing aside from the odd jump cut here and there, since I might just get a little lazy with the editing. Since really, like I said, this is a brainstorming session. There's not really anything firm to go over, so there's really not much of a point in me trying to really get anything firm down on here. So yeah, everybody, with that, let's get this started. The basic premise of the discussion. What is the virtual reality rig? Well, back in 2014, when I first started off on this channel, more or less, I was really just trying to do some stuff in regards to virtual reality, getting some of my thoughts out there, as well as what I thought would be the way to go forward in regards to virtual reality controls. At the time, that idea centered around a setup that I called the virtual reality rig. It consisted of a helmet piece, a set of bands, and a chair system that would all be designed to work together to give you the most immersive virtual reality experience you could have. That was really based mostly on the idea of getting a bunch of products that were coming out in the future and seeing what combination of them would work the best for a user's virtual reality experience. Since at the time, there were a bunch of virtual reality control solutions coming out between things like the Mayo, Prio VR, the whole virtual reality treadmill stuff, controllers, hand track controllers, Razer Hydra. There was a whole bunch of stuff being talked about and released, or talked about being released. Not really released anyhow. A lot of it's still mostly in development or being canned. I'm not too sure. But anyway, yeah, so that was the inspiration at the time. Just really see what's coming out and try to bring it all together to get an awesome virtual reality rig. Looking at where we are in 2016, I don't really think that waiting around for the whole industry to take up a different route is going to be the best option. Looking at what Oculus, HTC, and every other company is doing, it looks like motion controls are going to be the way of the future for now. And personally speaking, that doesn't really appeal to me. So I've opted to instead try to create a virtual reality rig that caters more to my personal tastes, as well as tries to develop certain technologies forward, even at the cost of the broader ability to be sold. So don't expect this virtual reality rig, guys, to be some kind of final product that once it's done here in the video vlogs or something, you're all of a sudden going to be able to go to Walmart or something and buy it. It's not going to be that. It's just going to be some guy tinkering around with mechanical stuff, learning things as he goes, trying to develop some awesome thing for his own personal use. It's not really meant to be something that you're going to follow as a tutorial either. I mean, I will occasionally give some hints here and there, as well as discuss some of the stuff I'm doing in detail, since that's going to be one of the main focuses for, at the very least, the following year or two. But don't really expect me to stop and say, oh, this is what an electromyogram is, or this is what a FNRS is. I'm mostly just going to assume your intelligence and suppose that you're aware of the topics, or capable of researching them, have watched my prior videos and are aware of them from those, and or just know more than I do about the whole matter and are just checking this out just to see what some weird kid's doing. But yeah, at this stage, there's just a broad idea at this point in time. It's just an expansion on what a lot of the ideas from 2014 are, so don't really expect too much different if you've already watched that video. Just expect a little bit more of a step up in regards to the extent that a lot of these things are going. Since I'm looking back at my ideas from that time, and I'm thinking that they were a little bit too, how should I put it, a little bit too optimistic on what the technologies were actually capable of at the time. So I'm thinking of ways to really harness them to their best potential and take advantage of their power to best execute on the idea at hand, which is either A, full immersion of virtual reality, and B, full input detection of the human intent, at the very least to the level of motor intents. Whether or not I can get cognitive intents, imaginary intents, imagery, or other stuff like that, that is an entirely different story, and I'm not really expecting that. As long as I can get the detection of motor motions, not even down to the digits, just the overall movements of the hand, or the exact, or angles, the amount of force being applied, that is the whole goal of the situation. That, immersion wise, I guess you could say that the rig is also aiming for sophisticated touch. I'm not really expecting too much out of it. I'm hopeful that it'll be pretty good, but at the same time, based on some footage I saw of an execution on it from another company, namely the Tesla suit, I was actually rather discouraged at what the possible results may be. Who knows, maybe I'll have better luck, but we'll have to see, and I guess I'll discuss it in more detail once we get into the actual rig. So for those of you that haven't watched the 2014 rig, that rig consisted of a helmet piece, a system of bands, mostly of the Mayo variety, and a chair system that would be used to keep the user comfortable and in a, I guess, suitable virtual reality position for long periods of time, and to keep them more or less bound, although really didn't really have that much of a binding point. So what does this rig aim to do? I aim to expand on every one of these items to a much more in-depth and I guess over the top degree, so that I can leave no space behind for any doubt that the technology is being used to the best of its ability to execute upon what it's being intended for. So just to give you an idea, for the helmet system, it's mostly just going to remain the same except with some expansions that are going to be applied to the band systems expansion overall. The bands, as they were called, since it only really consisted of a bunch of arm bands and stuff like that that went throughout your body, is being expanded to a full-fledged suit that is meant to be attachable, removable, and all that, without the user having to actually take it off like a piece of clothing, so much as just get into it almost like an Iron Man suit or something, where it puts itself on. I'll go into detail again later on, and the chair is being evolved into a bit more of an isolation pod. I'm referring to it as a capsule since it seems a little bit shorter to say, and it just kind of feels a little cooler, but you guys can call it whatever you want. I think my parents kind of understand it a little better when I refer to it as a refrigerator hung from the wall. And yeah, I guess you could also add that in as the final little bit. It is all being specifically tailored to my situation, since this is really going to be my rig for the most part. So expect a lot of details that are going to be explained in terms of room space or a living situation, cost, finances, education, knowledge, availability. Some products you just can't buy. It's not like some random company is just going to sell me battery acid or something. But yeah, just expect a lot of this stuff to be mostly tailored to my specific situation. I'm hopeful that you might be able to glean something out of it, but really this is more of a documentary series, just to show what the crazy guy with the virtual reality on his head is really just trying to do here. So yeah, let's just get into this thing right into the capsule. So we're going to follow an order, mostly going from the capsule to the suit to finally the helmet, since really the capsule and suit and helmet are kind of like a declining order of importance, or a raising order of importance, since actually guys, I'm already a little confused here, but really they're all somewhat important in their own ways and they're going to contribute to the experience. I just want to start off with capsule, then suit, then helmet, just in that order. So let's get this started. With the capsule, like I mentioned, it's basically going to be a huge refrigerator that I'm going to hang up for my wall. In my case, my current bedroom is already very well occupied by several pieces of furniture that are taking up most of the space. So I have a big L-shaped desk that is taking up the majority of the middle of my room, all the way up to the outer edge of the wall, and I currently have a large queen-sized bed behind me that occupies basically the other half of the room. There is no place I can really have in this room to place a huge virtual reality pod anywhere on the floor, so my only option at this point is going to have to be to hang it up from the wall or something. And in order to do that, I have to really look into what the best location would be, and at this point, I'm thinking that the best way to put it up on the wall might be to hang it up from either the current wall you can see behind me where the air conditioner is, or another side wall that connects into that, that's right next to the bed. It's occupied entirely by that, and just make it so that it declines or falls downward onto the bed in either angle so that it can have something to brace it down when it's in use. When it's not in use, I'm hoping to make it so that it can just fold back up, kind of like electronically, or like one of those beds that come out of the wall. That way during the day when I want to be using my bed, or I guess technically at night when I want to go to sleep, I can just put the pod away and just go to bed or use my bed as I want to, without having to worry about like having a bunch of cables moved around and all that other stuff. Even though I do suspect that in the early days there's going to be a lot of cabling to do. But yeah, that's more or less the idea for the capsule in terms of like situation or location. In terms of size, it's obviously going to have to be big enough to fit me inside of it, as well as have some space for all the other electronics that are going to be inside it. So at this point in time, tentatively, I'll say it'll probably be around 7 or 6.5 feet long, more or less. And in terms of depth, it'll probably be somewhere between 1 or 2 feet in deep. Another way I like to give it as an analogy is essentially it's just going to be a huge coffin that I'm going to hang up from my wall. So if anyone needed the whole cold light of day guy is a vampire thing going, yeah, I'm going to have that geek turned vampire thing going for me in that respect. It's really going to be something weird, but yeah, that's the overall idea in terms of that. Power wise, there are only 2 ports where I can really connect everything up to for the virtual reality rig. So it's probably going to have to take power from those 2 ports unless I can convince my family to allow me to get power from even more of the room's ports. But at the very least, tentatively, let's just say that I don't want to use too much wattage without necessity anyhow. So I'm probably going to try to design things to be somewhat fuel efficient, or at the very least to only use power in stages. So maybe when it's going down, it's using power in one stage or here or there. So just trying not to overblow my electricity bill as high as it can be. So just small little life considerations in that respect. In terms of the suit of the capsule itself, I'm looking at different materials for what I want to build it out of. Right now, I think I might need some kind of wood or metal really to hold everything together, since considering my own weight being around 200 pounds most of the time, and the kind of weight of all the electronics that are going to be inside there, it's probably going to have to be made out of something sturdy so it doesn't break all the time. Initially, when I was looking into things, I was thinking maybe using cardboard since it was going to be just on the bed and have the capsule mostly just be a lid. But right now, with some of the ideas I have going, it may be likely that I'll have to use something more sturdy like wood or metal in order to make sure that everything doesn't break apart or come off at the seams just because of the material wearing down over time or getting wet or something. So yeah, that's more or less what I'm looking for in terms of material for just the forming or the shape of the capsule. In terms of what it's going to have on its inner layers in order to better facilitate immersion, I'm going to be looking into a lot of different types of insulation, both sound insulation as well as thermal insulation, since there's going to be some different systems in place to help manage temperature within the capsule as well as to keep sound out, since one of the bigger issues that I have around this area is that there can be a good amount of sound coming in from here and there. Like as an example, you might be able to hear some of the raindrops that are coming from outside right now. In addition, I have an air conditioner on constantly during the summer. I'm only really have it turned off right now because I'm trying to do this whole video. But yeah, that can be another source for noise. I'll probably turn off the AC most of the time anyway while using virtual reality, since it's going to have its own air conditioner essentially anyway. But at the same time, I wouldn't want any random outside noise coming in too much, so whatever I can do to help isolate me from any outside interference would be very preferable if I can. But yeah, we'll just see, since there's really no way to perfectly soundproof this kind of a thing. But at the very least, I'm looking at using something like soundproof mats and just sticking those along the surface of the thing anywhere I can. The most in terms of thickness I might ever go with that would might be like half an inch or 2 inches maybe of sound isolation material, but I think that might start weighing things down a little bit and make it tricky to hang things from the wall. Actually, just as a little side mention in terms of how I'm going to hang it from the wall, right now I was just talking with my dad, we might be able to get a bunch of wood frameworks all up along the wall. It might be a bit tricky since the bed is really just jammed tightly into the space that it's in. So we might have to just get sheets of metal or something that might be able to slide on through onto the floor and have things kind of have a bit of an L shape, so it kind of grasps onto the floor with some feet, and then also goes along the wall and maybe even into the ceiling and screw everything in so it doesn't really move around all that much. I'm not too sure about the stability of it since the walls over in this house aren't really all that durable, but I'm going to do whatever I can to try to make it at least somewhat solid, even if it requires maybe adding like a few more like metal tubes or something, or pipes or sheets of metal all over the wall just to reinforce things. But yeah, back to the inside of the capsule itself. Yeah, I'm looking at making things a little bit more thermally isolated because of some of the air regulation and thermal regulation systems I plan to have in there. At the very least, I'm looking at having almost like a separate chamber or 2 to 3 inches or so of space within the capsule walls just for keeping air in or out, so that it can hold the air that is being generated by the air conditioner or heater unit in order to make sure that it can be distributed evenly or correctly. That's one of the worries I have, is maybe having like an air conditioner on the top of the unit, and that's where most of the cooling is generated, or having to put a bunch of air conditioning everywhere in order to get an overall effect. But the more likely option is just to have an air conditioner unit at the top, or a heater cooler unit at the top. And the problem with that kind of setup that I'm worried is that it'll let like just heat or cold come in from just a singular direction, which might mess up immersion. So it's like, why is it raining cold from above? Kind of a sensation in that respect. So it's like, the idea would be to keep the heating or cooling out into the capsule walls initially via the insulation, and then eventually whenever I need it in certain areas, I have small slits that can be electronically opened or closed in order to release the heat correctly at wherever I need it to be. It might not be a perfect system, but at least it's a little bit better for evenly distributing things as compared to just having everything come out of a singular port. Unless I can make it so that singular port or the diffusion rate is a little bit slower or faster or correctly distributed, but I'm not too sure whether or not I'll be able to control the laws of physics in that respect. I'll have to look into it. But yeah, in terms of what the actual capsule is going to have within for myself, the main thing that it's going to have is a form of a frame for a chair or the suit itself, because there has to be some kind of way for me to mount myself onto this thing. And I'm thinking of having almost like a zero gravity chair arrangement like I had in the initial virtual reality rig design from 2014, and just changing it up so instead of having cushioning or something like that, it just houses the actual parts for the suit, and that's going to be for the most part what I lay into. So instead of sitting into a nice comfy chair, I'll just sit into the specific part of the suit that every body part needs. And when the capsule opens and closes, when it closes down, it'll have the suit close on in onto the bottom half. So say there's an armrest right down here, then there's the suit piece like right here, it just cups into it. I just lay my hand in, and when the capsule closes, it'll close right down on top, and then it'll lock into place. That way the suit puts itself on, basically, as long as I'm aligning myself properly within the correct areas. I'm going to have to make sure that it doesn't accidentally like pinch me all the time, but even a little pinch here and there wouldn't be too bad. So yeah, more or less it's going to house the framework, although the framework itself may not necessarily be exactly a part of this capsule itself, because technically I'm looking into ways of keeping it afloat in the middle of the capsule instead of laying directly at the bottom of it. The reasons for this aren't really well thought out on my part. I'm still trying to work out the dynamics of it, or whether or not it'll actually be worthwhile to do this. But an idea I had would be to keep the suit itself somewhat suspended in midair, so I can manipulate the sensation of gravity in some respects. You might have seen a tweet I posted at one point where I was mentioning something about magnetic levitation in terms of the virtual reality rig. And the idea I had in that respect would be to keep things suspended via either cabling or magnetic levitation, and apply magnetic force either above or below to simulate the sensation of being pushed down or above by gravity. So just to explain it a little bit better, let's say I have a system of pulleys that keeps things mostly focused in terms of my gravitational force resistance on the outer parts of the suit. Since, to give you an idea of how gravity works, not a very big one since I myself didn't really study it all that work, but in terms of sensation of force of gravity, whenever you're pushing down, whenever a force pushes down, an equal and equivalent force pushes back up, depending on what's on. So if you're being held up by, say for example, a chair, most of that force is going up your back, up your feet, and whatever's on the chair directly. There's not going to be as much force pushing up if you, say, have your feet in midair or just pushing them up above, since those aren't directly being pushed back by the chair or the ground itself so much as they're being pushed up by the air that they're in contact with. In this case, I'd be refocusing that gravitational sensation across the outer limbs, so it almost feels like the central mass or my head or my body is being somewhat floated in midair. It's not a complete sensation of 0G since there is still a gravitational application down, but I feel that at the very least haptically it might be a little bit better for a sensation of at the very least not what you're used to for your brain, so it doesn't get into a comfort zone because your gravitational force is going to be focused on the outer limbs. As well, if I keep maglevs or a magnetic array towards the top, bottom, and sides of the suit, if I were to say put a piece of metal that extends or protrudes out from the suit towards that magnetic array and then say push it upwards using magnets, it would effectively give me the sensation that I'm being pushed from my back, or if there's a set of arrays at the front, I'm pushed down from those, I'm being pushed at my front. That can help to simulate the sensation of having gravity at different points. It's a good part of your sensation of gravity is where you're getting that resistance from the ground from. That can be a matter for disorientation when you're underwater, as an example, because you don't necessarily have a good track of where's up and down if you're flipping around within a diving suit. So I'm kind of hoping on the same effect having some bearing here, although at the same time certain aspects of the helmet system may or may not necessitate the application of this, but I want to kind of keep my options open just to make sure that everything I can take advantage of is being taken advantage of in that respect. So yeah, just another crazy idea I had in that regard. Magnetic levitation for almost no reason, guys. That's where we're at right now. But yeah, that mostly does it for everything in the suit. Aside from maybe a haptic application that I'm thinking about involving vibration motors, but I'll kind of go into that along in the suit area. So let's just dive on into the suit right now. The suit isn't really all that complicated from a certain perspective. In terms of what it's actually doing, all it is meant to do is put sensors in the correct location that they're needed for examination, as well as put stimulus items in the correct location that they're needed for stimulation. The only thing that makes it a bit complicated is exactly how many applications there are actually going to be. So just to give you an idea, guys, in terms of sensors for picking up inputs, I'm looking at electromyograms, infrared sensors, visible light sensors, spectrograms, microphones, pressure sensors, and inertial measurement units, just to name a few. And the idea is going to be to try to coalesce all that data together to get a good picture of what you want to do at each muscle. And when I say each muscle, I kind of mean in terms of muscle groups. So the biggest change that I mentioned, guys, from the band system of the 2014 rig to the 2016 idea for the rig, is that instead of having specific bands be in just general areas, so just assume that having a band here would be enough to cover here or the whole forearm, my idea is to move the actual individual EMG or electromyographic units onto their necessary muscles. So I'd have at the very least one on my biceps, one on my triceps, one on my forearm muscles and stuff like that, just to get a good examination of each muscle individually instead of just trying to group them all together based on a single loop that we've developed. This helps to get a bit more individualized data and gives us a better picture of the attempted activity by our muscles, but at the same time it kind of makes things a bit complicated since we're going to have to cover each muscle via cabling and all that. And the best idea I have right now for managing all that is to have some form of suit. And like I mentioned, I don't really want to use a cloth-based suit that will require me putting it on and off, since that actually introduces a potential risk of me damaging the suit and the wiring and all that if I have to use a stretchy material or my body changes enough. So in this case, the suit itself is going to have to be 3D printed to be exactly conformed to the feature form of my body. So I'm going to have to consider in some regards the way my current body is formed, although I might have to lose or shed a few pounds, add a few pounds here and there depending on what I need. But for the most part, it's going to be custom tailored just to my body to best accommodate the sensors, as well as all the other things that are going to be going into it. So there's going to be some give here and there, as well as some inflatable systems, just to give me maybe that 0.2, maybe those 2, 3, 5 millimeters of extra control Although I'm not really hoping to have to use all that much inflation within the system unless I want to check my blood pressure. So yeah, just to give you kind of a bit of a sandwich idea of the metaphor, the suit itself would be the top layer. On the middle layer, there would probably be like some kind of soft gel membrane or a cloth membrane to hold everything together. And distributed all throughout that membrane would be different sensors, stimulators, and as well cameras and all that, just to help keep things monitored. But I've already just gone into the EMG. Let's go into the whole other shebang of sensors that weren't mentioned before on the 2014 rig. The infrared sensor is actually meant to kind of go together with the visible light sensor. In this case, I was inspired by something that I saw done by Microsoft using the Kinect version 2.0. They actually managed to read people's heart rates from a distance using just the visible light cameras from the Kinect. I was kind of curious as to how they accomplished that, and I learned that the way they did it was by taking advantage of micro movements that occur in the human body that may not be perceptible very well to the human eye, but by using an algorithm, you can take regular 2D video and examine microscopic or sub-noticeable or subconscious changes that occur in the human flesh or as a result of activities. So you could watch somebody's heart or blood flow occur in real time. In this case, my idea would be to use either visible light or infrared light, whatever works best in the kind of dark environment of the suit, and to try to help amplify that using some light to see the subsurface activity that is going on within my skin. So just to give you an idea, guys, of what I'm talking about, say you were to take a very bright flashlight and just put it right behind your hand or something. You might not be able to see the entirety of the light, but on some of the looser parts of your skin, you might be able to see a bit of a bright red or a brightish orange color. That is the light going through your skin and showing some of the subsurface to an extent. In this case, I'm hoping that by examining the subsurface using a very close light and a very close camera right up front, I might be able to get an idea of how blood is flowing through each individual muscle group. That way I can get a better picture of what's going on in terms of its activity, since one of the biggest factors for muscle activity is aerobic exercise or isometric exercise, and a lot of those activities you tend to use blood in order to keep your muscles oxygenated and with nutrition, and that might be monitored to get a better grasp of what the actual intent is being done here. Another hope I have here might be requiring the spectrogram, or we might even get lucky and just be able to observe a different color change via visible light or infrared light. But the idea being, since when you use a muscle, it's probably going to deoxygenize the blood that's in that area, we might be able to notice a small change in the pigment or the color of the blood as it's leaving certain veins or going through certain arteries as another signifier for activity within the muscles. This is all just to get a better picture of what the muscles are doing. All the other sensors aside from the infrared, visible light, spectrogram, and the or spectroscope, and the electromyogram are mostly just kind of fluff items that I'm going to be including just for a little bit of extra security. And really, they're more likely to be just placed into broader areas, similarly to how the Maya would be. So maybe one of these for every limb, or one for every area or region of the body. So we might have, for example, a single microphone for just the forearm, or a single microphone for the whole right arm or something, or a single IMU for the whole left leg. But in this case, the IMUs and the microphones are mostly being used to detect some subtler data that might not even be perceptible through all the noise that's going to be going on. So to give you guys an example, in terms of what the mic is going to be used for, one might not think about it, but our body creates a lot of sound that we may not notice just because of the amount of random background noise that is going on in our natural lives that we don't detect, that we are constantly being bombarded by because of the lack of any defenses against that sound. I've heard that a lot of people that go into super soundproof rooms that have like tons and tons of insulation are actually a little bit unnerved by the fact that they can hear their own heartbeat or hear their own muscles stretching and contracting and doing all that. Well, in this case, since we're going to be in a very quiet environment due to the isolation capsule, as well as the fact that the suit itself is going to act as a bit of a sound barrier, we might be able to listen in on the muscular activity or the inner body activity just by using microphones. So I might be able to pick up on my heartbeat just based on the sound of like the dun dun or the doki doki, however you want to pronounce it, using the microphone right on the chest. So I'm curious as to whether or not that might be another useful application in the event that another one of the sensors fails, or maybe some of the interactivity between things isn't working out all that well. So that would be the general idea, just try to listen to the muscle activity and seeing if we can observe any patterns in sound. And for the IMUs, this is a bit more of a localized thing, but the idea being that even if the suit is going to be preventing us from moving, since, like I said, the chair is mostly going to be a framework within the capsule, so we're not really going to be able to move around within that framework. We're going to be mostly locked in. I'm still debating whether or not I'm going to end up having to have a little bit of give, just so my body doesn't go numb from staying like maybe 5, 10, 24 hours without any movement whatsoever. But at the same time, it's like just giving a little bit of give here and there, even without the give. We might be able to detect some micro movements using IMU, since even if your body doesn't manage to move on the surface, there is still some subsurface movement, and that might generate enough kinetic energy or force that we might be able to ascertain what the accelerometer picked up from that kind of activity. So it might be another good indicator or confirmation item for what the input intent is in regards to any of the particular limbs that we try to move around. So yeah, that mostly covers that one. And in terms of pressure, again, even if we don't manage to get a full subsurface movement or full on surface level kinetic motion, like moving my arm fully, the isometric contraction, or just plain old the force of trying to move against the boundaries that we're being set up against, might be enough pressure to detect using pressure sensors. This one is actually one that I'm very much considering putting on the cutting room floor, just because I'm not too sure how much effort it's going to take to implement everywhere, and whether or not it's going to give enough payout compared to all the other systems. But if I see the need for it, I may implement it. We'll have to see based on how things work out in the prototypes and stuff like that. But yeah, that more or less does it for most of the sensors that are going to be going in for the inputs. This is really one of the first or the most important factor for the input solution inside of this rig, since I do have other input items that I'm going to be putting inside of the helmet, but they are nowhere near as accurate. So I want to make sure that the suit itself is capable of as much accuracy as possible in this area. So if I'm lucky, I'll see if I can get things up to a very high refresh rate for motion. I'd like to see something in the realm of maybe 128 to 256 hertz at the very least. If I could get it up to 1,000, like what John Carmack did with the Oculus Rift, and I guess all the other virtual reality developers are doing with their high-end virtual reality headsets, I'd really like to get something very high refresh rate like in that respect, since it would give the most accurate data. But at the same time, considering how little finesse we may actually have with moving the body within virtual reality, I'm not too worried about that, so long as I can get everything done within a timely, time frame. So yeah, that just about does it for most of the input solution. In terms of the haptic or immersion solutions for the suit itself, there's going to be quite a bit in there too. One of the things I want to get out of the way here is another thing I was mentioning on Twitter was about water cooling my own body. Yeah, this is a kind of funky idea I had here. It was also kind of inspired a little bit by Linus Tech Tips YouTuber here on YouTube. They do a bunch of tech related videos on their channel. But yeah, they were doing some kind of whole room water cooling thing. And I always kept that in the back of my mind, along with some mineral oil computers that they also did. And one of the ideas I had, since I still haven't upgraded my own personal gaming system or work system to water cooling yet, would be whether or not I could actually implement it so that I have a huge, gigantic water cooling loop that connects not only to my PC and not only to the capsule, but also to my whole body in order to regulate the thermals that I feel within the system. In this case, this is one part immersion, but it's also another part safety. I'll go into that once I go into the electrically based haptic system. But yeah, to say the least, I've been thinking about whether or not it might be more practical just to have one gigantic loop and put the radiator outside or something, just so that things can maintain as cool as possible or as hot as possible depending on what is needed. It's going to be a tricky thing to manage, since if I need heat, I could just draw it from the heat of the CPU itself. So it kind of feels a little bit weird to think that I might be able to heat my own body using the CPU. It might be a good manner of efficiency, or whether or not it'll be even enough, who knows. Maybe my body will be cool enough that I can cool my PC with my own body in that respect, since it is going to be connected throughout the entirety of my whole body. So from head to toe water cooling loop. That might be enough to help keep the PC itself cool without even needing a radiator. Although that does go into the whole safety matter, which again I say I'll go into in a moment. But yeah, aside from the water cooling loop of madness, there's also an idea I had for vibration motors. I kind of mentioned this a few months back. I was thinking of maybe working on it as a product, but honestly, guys, with everything that's been going on in the virtual reality industry, I've just kind of lost interest in all that kind of stuff, so I might as well just mention it right now. The idea would have been an expansion on some of the things I was going upon inside of the virtual reality touch system. In this case, instead of being surface haptics, it would be more like, or surface haptics or surround haptics, pardon, I always get the two confused, but instead of being that, it would be more volume haptics. We're taking advantage of the haptic systems to generate a more volumetric effect as compared to a purely surface level effect. To explain what I mean, the current ideas for surround haptics would involve having an array of haptic sensation actualizers such as vibration motors or electrostatic arrays all over your skin, and making it so that the translation of electrical sensation from one to the other is kind of being perceived almost as motion. So for example, if I have one sensor here, 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 and here, if I activate them smoothly, turn this one on, then slowly weaken it until I reach this one goes max, slowly weaken it until this, it'll be perceived almost as though one smooth haptic motion. In this case, the idea would be to also apply that very same philosophy in the vertical sense. So we would have, let's say, one vibration motor here and another vibration motor here. If I vibrate this one strongly and then this one strongly afterwards, after weakening this one, it might be perceived as though something like, let's say, a pencil just jammed right through the hand or something. So yeah, just another little thought in terms of an execution on the haptics. In this case, this is another implementation I might be integrating together with the capsule that I was mentioning earlier, whereby I would have high power vibration motors on the capsule itself or the chair or the framework mechanism, so that applies itself not only throughout the capsule or framework, but that might also translate to a slight sensation of touch or the sensation of the kinetic energy coming off of those distant vibration motors, so that we can sort of apply it as though air is being vibrated just before coming into contact with our body. Since that's, I think, a part of haptics that we might not consider very much is the actual like aerodynamics that are going around our skin at all times, as well as the dynamics of our body getting used to things like the chairs that we're feeling or the feet on our floor. We might forget that we're actually touching them, even though we're still very much in contact with them, just because they haven't really changed much. It's like you get comfortable in a chair, you kind of forget that it's there. But yeah, the idea would be to kind of take advantage of that, but really all of these haptic immersion systems and all that may end up being unnecessary depending on how well I can execute or how well the system itself can execute on the haptics, being with the electrostatic mechanism. I kind of went into this with the whole haptics thing, but this company called Tesla Suit was trying to work on this too, and the idea being that you use electricity to stimulate the nerves along your skin, and depending on how you stimulate them, or the electrical frequencies, amplitudes, and the manner, you may be able to simulate the sensation of touch, pressure, maybe pain, and even thermoception, all just using electrical frequency modulation or just the changes in electricity. I was watching the usage of this kind of a system by somebody over at D News, their YouTube channel, and it kind of worried me a little bit since their implementation seemed to be tickling the user more than really giving them full-fledged sensation. It was kind of hard to tell really since they were kind of a little bit caught up in the moment, but I would really like to see how that kind of would apply in this kind of a situation, whereby I might end up having tons and tons of sensors, maybe up to 128 or 300 depending on how many areas I'm covering on the entire body. And in addition, another little small concern I actually have with this system actually is the safety issues as well as possible interference with the haptics. Since, like I said, it's an electrical system that stimulates the skin, but EEG tries, or EMG tries to detect the electrical activity of the skin. So if I'm stimulating the skin and trying to detect it, I'm worried that the stimulation will interfere with the detection. I'm trying to really think of what I could possibly do here to try to mitigate this, One of the ideas I had would be to maybe like add like a frequency modulation or an alternating type of a system. So say for example there's a 30 hertz refresh rate on the input detection and a 30 hertz rate on the stimulation. I would just alternate it so when one is active the other is off, but the moment the other one turns off or is supposed to be inactive the other one turns on. So it kind of just alternates up down, or detect input, detect input, detect input. That way they don't really interfere with each other as much. I'd have to really look at the timings for that. Or maybe I just try to arrange things so that there's a bit of more distance. Since this is mostly going to be static stimulation or just very light stimulation, so it might not even really register compared to the larger stimulation that is generated by the huge amounts of muscle activity that are going to be occurring in the isometric contractions. But yeah, it's just a matter of testing in this case. I'm not too sure about what's going to go on there. I'm hopeful that it's not going to be a problem, but worst case scenario, I just try to look into the other solutions or use vibration motors instead of the whole electrostatic system as an alternative method. Although again, wiring could also be an issue, so there's a huge amount of things to consider. Insulation is going to be pretty important, and placement is going to be very important in the system. So a huge reason why I'm going to have to consider very carefully, like, how do I specialize this for my body? How do I change this? Where do I consider that? So yeah, pretty big stuff going on there. Well, guys, with that, I guess we should go into the last area. Whoops, sorry about that, everybody. I just noticed in editing that I forgot to go over the whole safety mechanism I was talking about a little earlier. To cover the basic gist of it very briefly, essentially the concern I have is that all the mechanisms that I have in place in regards to electrostatic stimulation of the skin for thermoreception might be somewhat problematic in regards to my overall health, since there's a small but not necessarily certain chance that I may accidentally forget to properly regulate my own body's temperature, and if I don't keep that under check, I could possibly give myself something like hypo or hyperthermia depending on the simulation at hand. So say I was in the middle of a desert during the day, I might accidentally overheat the capsule externally and my body temperature will rise accordingly without having the opportunity to cool, because the brain may not remember to cool itself off via perspiration as a result of these electrostatic stimulators telling it that I've cooled myself off after having something like a cool drink or something, even though in reality my body is overheating. So that could potentially lead to things like hypothermia or heat stroke. Or likewise, if it was the middle of the night and it's very cold, I take a hot drink, I'm alright in the game, but in real life my body's about to freeze to death. So there's a bunch of little factors like that that could potentially lead to dangerous scenarios, and I'd like to be sure that I can cover for that. And one of the things I'd like to do in that regard is to have another system in place to manage the thermals aside from the electrical static effect, since this would be a little bit more directly attuned to the actual body. Since the suit is going to be very connected to the body, I'll probably just stick on something like a thermostat or something like that, or maybe even use the infrared data to check up on the body's temperature, and then adjust it accordingly using the water cooling loop I was talking about earlier. So the water cooling loop, while it could theoretically be also used for immersion, I most likely will just use it to make absolutely sure that I never overheat or overcool myself, so that I'll be on the safe side in regards to my body's temperature. I mean, guys, virtual reality is fun and all, but I don't want to die yet, so gotta make sure I don't overdo it. Alright, back to the video. Okay, everyone, on to the last system, which is mostly going to be coverage on the helmet. The helmet's actually gotten a little bit complicated right now, guys. As you can tell from my last video, which was that scathing review of the Oculus Rift, I'm not really all that enthused by the current HMDs we've got. I mean, in many respects, they're still the very best that we have in terms of immersion, but at the same time, I'm kind of wondering what kind of technology is being held back for the sake of consumer, I guess, availability and reasonability, I suppose, but I'm just wondering what I could possibly do with a custom solution if I were to look into things very dynamically, since I've been really paying a lot of attention to stuff like Star VR a lot more, since I seem to be aiming for a lot higher FOVs by taking the whole let's make this a nice small compact system and throwing that idea out the window. But yeah, I've been looking into that. I've been trying to look into stuff like light field displays, maybe projector systems, regular 3D systems, the Nintendo 3DS's parallax. I've just been looking into different alternatives rather than than what we currently got. I'm even really curious to know what Magic Leap is doing, since apparently they've even managed to get focusing via in 3D using our eyes down. I'm not really too sure how that works, but it's definitely something that I'd really like to see. But yeah, for now, I'm just looking at using the Oculus Rift, but definitely know that in the future I'm going to be looking into other alternatives. And if Generation 2 of virtual reality sucks again, I'll probably just go out of that and just look for entirely different solutions on my own. See if I can find something else. I mean, hey, I'm lucky just work things out using a smartphone, so who knows, maybe I'll get lucky and find something too. Not gonna cross my fingers, but hey, maybe. Oh, wait, I just crossed my fingers. Yeah, kind of tired, guys, but yeah. The helmet system is mostly just going to consist of that visual system, as well as some audio systems, some smell systems, some taste items, and the whole array of sensors that we were talking about with regards to the suit. Although it will also have a few personalized sensors for the organs that are in the head that aren't really all around the body, kind of like the skin is with the suit. So just in terms of sound, just to get that out of the way real quick, I'm looking into a multiple driver system, kind of like what OSIC is going for. Their big thing that they're touting, as well as the whole positional tracking, but in this case the head is going to remain somewhat consistent. So the main kind of tracking I'm going to have to do is going to be mostly in the virtual space. And I'm just going to have to try to make sure that the software can keep up with the drivers. So yeah, there's that right there. Not really all that complicated. Personally speaking, I've been rather satisfied with video game sound for a long time. I'm not very much of an audiophile, so as long as the sound sounds kind of right or it makes sense, I'm not really going to complain all that much. Although I do find that a lot of virtual reality demos right now aren't really taking that much of an advantage of sound to the best of its potential. I'd like to see what I can do with that in my own software, but even right now I don't really have that much time to work on it, so who knows where that's going to go. So yeah, that just about does it mostly for the sound. In terms of what I'm going to go for smell, that's a little bit more of a funky solution. Even though I say I have a smell solution, it's really just something very simple. I'm thinking of just getting some items that have a general sense or a smell for certain items, like maybe an earthy smell or a sweet smell, a fragrant smell. Just trying to find some generalized smell items and just try to get the essences down to like maybe a perfume style item that can maybe be just opened up real quick so that the scent kind of wafts into the nose. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to handle that, since I don't want to have a very large mechanical system, since that might create a little bit of noise and a lot of other bothersome things right there at the front of my head, which is going to be plenty busy enough as it is. But I definitely want to get some kind of a smell in there, since I really think that having some smell really helps to give you some memory or acceptance into certain environments, since I don't really think I'd like to go to the beach without having that nice salty sea smell that you can get out there. Especially even in virtual reality, since right now beaches in virtual reality are kind of cool, but I want that extra little bit of flair of haptic smell, the sensation of the temperature on your skin and all that. But that's just me adding in more things that are really necessary, since I don't really think most people would be killing themselves if Sword Art Online or something didn't feature smell or for some reason or another. Although, hey, never hurts. In terms of taste, actually, this is a bit of a weirder one. Back in 2013 or 2014, I actually mentioned this too. There was a virtual lollipop, is what they called it, which is basically just something that had a bunch of electrodes placed on an array at the bottom, and you just put it in your mouth, and depending on how the tongue was stimulated, you could feel up to 4 different tastes. I haven't really followed through on researching that, so I'm going to have another look at it, but the 4 tastes that they already announced were very promising. Namely, they had umami, no, they didn't have umami, but they did have saltiness, bitterness, sweetness, and sourness, which those 4, you can already make some pretty good stuff. I kind of lament the lack of umami, since that means we aren't going to get very savory flavor, so I'm not too sure whether or not we're going to get a very good cheeseburger or pizza in. But with sweetness, I think I might be able to get me some soda, so I feel like I'll be pretty good. Although in my case, I'm not too sure whether or not I want to use something like a lollipop, since I feel that might be a bit too much. I'm personally a little bit more keen on the idea of making a bit more of like a mesh or a plastic tongue wrap or something. Something that would just go into my mouth and kind of just have electrodes right on there. Maybe have some suction and just like seal it right onto my tongue. And then once I needed to put it off, it'll just like re-add air. I'll probably have to make this very like delicate and somewhat fragile in some respects, but durable enough that it might not break as soon as I bite down. But at the same time, I want to still be able to speak, since another input mechanism that's going to be in the helmet that's not going to be in the other systems, well, I guess it technically is, but not in this respect, is microphones for listening to my voice, since Really, right now, I'm not really that concerned with very fine finger details, which technically also means I'm not all that concerned with typing, which is going to make it a little bit of a problem to really navigate certain things or search for things using text. So I wanted to rely a little bit more on voice input, and for that I'm going to need some good microphones, and I'll still have and the ability to speak. So if I shove a giant lollipop in my mouth, I'm not really going to be able to speak all that well now, will I? So yeah, just another consideration for some usability things. But yeah, that mostly does it sensory-wise, aside from the vision thing, like I mentioned. For now, worst comes to worst and everything else is done, I'll just shove the Oculus Rift in. But in the future, I'm hoping that we get better virtual reality solutions, because right now, the current resolution is really leaving things lacking. I mean, I really, like I said in the review, the Oculus Rift is plenty good in almost every area. The two key areas where it's falling flat are by far the God rays, as well as in the FOV, since I was really hoping for a bit more of a field of vision. There's not the sensation of driving, for example, in Project Cars didn't really feel as good for me, since I don't really feel the velocity all that much, because I don't really get as much peripheral as I want to. I almost think that using a triple monitor setup might give you a better sense of that velocity in some areas, because you can see the images like crossing by you in a distorted manner on the side. But maybe that's just my opinion on the matter. But yeah, I just want to get more of that periphery in. So at the very least, maybe 130, if not 140 degrees. I'm really hopeful that they'll get something down for that, because right now it's just kind of disappointing where we're at. And resolution-wise, I was actually somewhat satisfied with the Oculus Rift. I just want a bit more resolution just for some better clarity here and there in some areas. I already mentioned it, but screen door-wise, I'm actually just perfectly fine with where the Oculus Rift is. If I move my head around or look around with my eyes, it mostly disappears. But yeah, that just about does it more or less for the sensory stuff. There's not really all that much going on aside from the whole haptic solution as well. That just about covers the quote-unquote 5 senses, because yeah, skin's all entirely covered up by the suit and the helmet in that case, and there's the smell, look, taste, and hearing thing. But yeah, the other elements that we have to go into are the input solutions, since they're actually going to be a bit of a interesting mechanism. Right now, the idea I have for inputs in regards to the head is a bit of a dynamic I like to call the call and check system. In this case, I'm somewhat confident that EEG and FNIRS are not going to be sophisticated enough to single-handedly handle virtual reality inputs in any reliable manner. Since right now, if honestly, like the perspective I'm using right now is, guys, no one's really the first right now to think of using EEG for virtual reality. I'm not. Maybe a lot of you guys commenting aren't. There are plenty of people who have been thinking ever since Sword Art Online, or well before Sword Art Online, let's use EEGs as brain-computer interfaces. My concern is the fact that we have scientists with tons and tons of electrodes. I'm talking like 256 electrode caps using saline solution and everything, and they still can't manage to get a full-fledged running around doing everything just using EEG. Really says a lot about where the technology is right now. So that kind of makes me wonder what we can use it for. And my idea in this case would be to try to, one, up the technology in terms of its refresh rate. The current Emotive Insight that's out on the market, I believe, has around a refresh rate of 256 on the higher end. If we can get that up to maybe 1,000 or somewhere in the realm of 2,000, I'm not too sure about the specifics on that, since right now I'm not really that well deep into the electronic engineering area. But getting a very high refresh rate would be somewhat valuable, since we may be able to perform like the same operation or the same check multiple times. One of the ideas would be just to like try to like get rid of certain data points, or just try to find certain patterns in the whole activity, since in this case it's somewhat, I believe, event-related potentials, or ERPs, that we're going to be trying to detect, since the movement of my arm is going to be the event that I'm trying to detect, and we're trying to see the electrical activity here. But my idea would be to try to take advantage of the fact that even if it has a somewhat low accuracy rate, which, guys, in the world of game development, a 90% accuracy rate is almost unacceptable in my opinion. If I can only rely on my inputs working 9 out of 10 times, that's almost worthless to me. Since, hey, if I'm going to try to throw a ball and it decides to throw itself right backwards all of a sudden, it's going to feel very janky and it's going to completely throw me out of immersion. But one of the ideas I had is to try to just use it almost as a bit of a prediction system. will have the call system act as a preparation. So in other words, it'll use the the event related potential, or the occurrence of the brain activity, and use that to try to guess. In other words, based on the position of the arm currently, like let's say for example, if my arm is fully extended outward and can no longer go forward, and there's a sudden change in brain activity in the area that is mostly associated with the arm. Since in this case, guys, I'm mostly looking at trying to take advantage of this kind of crownish area right at the top of the head where the motor cortex is. I've seen a lot of diagrams showing that it's almost like a bit of a map. I'm pretty sure it's not that clear cut, but they seem to kind of map it out as being the top of your head, mostly handling the legs, and the lower down you go, the more close up to your neck and head that you get. But yeah, the idea would be in this case to just try to take advantage of those associations. So if it detects something in the arm region, and it detects that that arm region is being significantly changed from what it currently is, it might assume immediately that it's probably going to be a motion different than what is currently being done. So if I have my arm fully extended, like I said before, if a sudden change occurs, it might assume that I'm probably either going to move it to the left or to the above or backwards. So that would probably be the idea to get. So it will begin preparing for that action, and the moment that any part of the suit itself detects a confirmation code, so in other words, the moment it starts to observe that the upper arm starts performing that action, it'll know, okay, we've got the confirmation, or the check is now conducted. So that would help to really give the whole mechanism its confirmation, and now it can perform the action without the concern that, oh, is this right or wrong? No, we know that it's right. The only question I have here is whether or not we're going to be fast enough with the suit, since I recall even reading with the Mayo at some point, or listening, or at the very least somewhere I read that even with myographic signals, we might even have negative latency, which I define negative latency as being able to know what's going to happen before it happens, so almost prediction in this case. Since if you know that if this electrical signal has made it to the muscle, and the muscle is just in the middle on the process of acting it out, that electrical signal has already occurred, and we can read that before it even has to propagate fully throughout the muscle. So that really serves us pretty well in terms of knowing what's going on and being able to take advantage of things within game, especially depending on the frame rate or the exact resolution of motion. If it's down to a 30 FPS or a 60 FPS update rate, just using smoothing and algorithmic correction, we may be able to get something pretty close to one-to-one motion. Even if it's not perfect, at the very least it'll be somewhat fluid and engaging. And my priorities right now in terms of movements are just the overall limbs. So the ability to walk, for one, no need for even the feet in this case, just the heels. As long as I can get the overall motion of walking, that'll be already satisfactory in one area. And in terms of the hands, just being able to reach out and point at things somewhat accurately is another very big priority using the EEG. Anything else I can get out of it, whether it be like thought cognition, like, oh, making something disappear like you can in the emotive, right now that is all just fluff for me in terms of inputs. The only other thing I might be able to want or glean out of here might be emotion data, such as like fear, resentment, love, enjoyment, and all that stuff. Since it may be useful biometrics in this case for game development in my case, even if it's only a use case study of one or whoever else could shove their head inside of the helmet. But yeah, it's just some interesting data to get out of that. And like I said, also the FNIRS is probably going to do the same thing. I'm still not exactly sure how many electrodes I'm going to shove on my head for this kind of a purpose, and exactly how long it's going to take to set up all the software. I think there's some open source software already out for EEGs. I'm going to have a look at that to see what's going on there. But yeah, in terms of the actual EEG, I'm not really sure there's any currently available product solutions. So like I said at the beginning of the video, a lot of this stuff is going to end up having to be custom. So do not expect this being done in a very timely manner. But yeah, I guess the last two elements of inputs, like I said, were the microphone, which is again just mostly voice inputs. The only other thing I might be able to, or I might want to check, might be even like the tongue using a camera or something, as well as the way it, how should I put, the whole voice input system, so, you know, detecting words and all that. But the last input system here for controls is actually going to be very important, the eyes. This is going to be a very big thing for virtual reality in Gen 2, I hope. Really hope. But yeah, the idea being, guys, as we increase the amount of power we're using inside of virtual reality, we're going to need more and more graphical power. So the current virtual reality setups we have already are taxing stuff like GTX 980 Ti's or 1080s in order to just keep things running at 1080p at I guess 2.5 megapixels or 1080.5p or something. I don't know how to pronounce what's it called, this resolution we have right now. But yeah, the current resolution at 90 hertz is already making our hardware just kind of keel over to handle things. So it kind of makes me wonder what we're going to have to do going forward. And one of the best ideas people have proposed right now is using something like foveated rendering, whereby we follow the fovea, or the area of our eye that has the most resolution, and try to take advantage of that for the benefit that we're only going to have to render everything else at a much lower resolution or even color space or whatever. So that kind of has me wondering whether or not I'd be able to implement that into my own solution. I recall seeing somebody using their own homebrew solution using a Tobii eye tracker, and it seemed to have some pretty good results. I recall them mentioning something about not being able to track the saccades of the eye fast enough, so the small region that was being checked generally didn't have enough of a boost. Personally speaking, right now, even if I were only to be using like left, right, or forward-looking eyes as a metric, I still think I may be able to get some kind of a usable foveation out of that. It may not be perfect, but it's still going to be somewhat useful, and especially with the super low FOVs that we've got right now. But that's besides the point. Anyhow, in terms of actually tracking the eye, I might have the additional advantage that I'm also going to be using electrical activity as well as neural activity and infrared activity all at the same time to try to pick up where the eye is doing and what it's doing at any moment in time. Since in their case, I believe the Tobii eye tracker is either visibly based or using infrared as well. So it's trying to get a very fine picture of the eye. In my case, I don't really want a very fine picture of the eye. I don't really need it. As long as I can get at the very least 3 subdivisions, so divide the screen up into 3 sections. As long as it's looking, if I'm looking at the middle, looking straight ahead, it'll send, it'll have 50% of the screen rendered at maximum resolution, everything else rendered at maybe 540 or 1080p, whatever's reasonable enough for the eye. That way we don't have to really worry about the eye getting out, since the moment it starts going towards the left, the electrical data would already have been picked up or predicted in some capacity, since that's actually one of the more obvious electrical signals we can get out of EEG itself. It's just the fact that the eyes generate so much electricity in their activity. So I'm really hopeful that maybe the EOG or the EEG activity will be enough for us to pick up what's going on ahead of time anyhow. So that might be enough for us to keep up with the eye, just to make sure that it's always within a region where it has high resolution. I'm not too sure exactly about what the periphery resolution is going to have to be, but if it's low enough, we might be able to take advantage of super high resolutions like 4K in terms of pixel densities, but in terms of actual execution on it, we might be rendering in total somewhere in the realm of maybe just 4K's worth of megapixels, so only 8 megapixels, or if we got some kind of crazy 9 subdivision thing kind of going, like say we use a Star VR style type system using 2 displays, 2 4K displays. 2 4K displays, that's around 16 megapixels, but divide those 2 4K displays by 9 units. So in other words, only a ninth of the screen is being divided. In other words, we're only looking straight ahead, to the left, right, up, down, and the 4 diagonals. So if we can get something like that going on using just the EEG or EOG or the EMG as well as the infrared solution, we may be able to reduce the processing demands way down. So divide 16 down by a ninth or an eighth, just to be a little bit more pessimistic there, and we would theoretically have around 2 megapixels. So sub 2 GTX 1080s in there and tell it to run 1080p in virtual reality, and I'm kind of hopeful to see what the graphics would be out of that. But yeah, again, more custom software, more just random speculation here. I mean, the most I've ever heard of anybody getting a performance boost so far was Microsoft, I think, getting a 6 times boost, and I believe they're using some pretty accurate eye tracking, so maybe I'm overestimating the benefits of foveated rendering here. In addition, it may also be another benefit for the whole 3D thing, since, you know, Nintendo, I believe, is also using another visible thing, a visible eye tracking system for their 3D system, but I have to look at the new 3DS since I haven't seen one in the wild yet. But yeah, guys, I'm just mostly rambling on here. You guys probably have the overall gist at this point. It's going to be a huge capsule hung from my wall that lands onto my bed that has an open and close, and I have to lay in. Once I lay in, it'll close down, and I'll be isolated from the virtual world. Inside of that thing I'm laying down is a suit that covers all the haptics, and I have a helmet on there just for all the senses that it's not covering, as well as some other mechanisms. That and the call check system. So brain or the EEG data that's calling, it's trying to predict it. It's like, I call that this is probably going to happen. There's a 90% accuracy rate on that, with the 100% accuracy rate on the body. And in the event that there's that 1% that 10% chance that it's inaccurate, or 20 or 30%, it'll just correct for us. So it's like, oh, we just missed one frame. It might be a bit of a judder, or it might require a bit of smoothing here and there. But I'm sort of optimistic, since another mechanism I want to try to work out, even right now in my current works with a VR RPG that I'm testing out, is just seeing how using force for movement, as is compared to using more direct translation in animations, compares as to, well, using direct translations and animations. Since in this case, the force itself is going to be something to consider, and just making sure that the haptic application back matches may be a matter of keeping immersion as well, without having to necessarily be 100% true to the input, since your body will adjust to the fact whenever it has different pressures on it, different altitudes, different weights, different clothes. It has to adjust to all that, so I'm hopeful that it might adjust to this different situation based on what the haptics tell it. Well then, everyone, that just about covers things. The only other thing I want to mention is what kind of a time frame I'm looking at for this kind of a project. Guys, there's no other way to put it. This is going to be a multiple year long project. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it if it was 2022 and I still wasn't done on this kind of a system. My only real kind of concern / solace in this kind of a situation is that at this point, I doubt any of the stuff I'm working on is going to be in virtual reality in the mainstream, even in 2022. So yeah, right now we're looking at motion controls for all of this generation, and looking at how popular they've gotten again, I wouldn't doubt it if we saw it again for the next one. So yeah, guys, this is just going to be me working on this, and any of you who also wish to pursue the route of non-motion control virtual reality. Thank you very much for watching this video, everyone. Pardon the sound of the rain going on here, as well as the whole blue from the monitor. I just wanted to make sure that I got this information out there, since I've been trying to figure out how to best communicate this for a while now, and after a point I kind of had to realize, if it's going to take me an hour or two to get all this information out in a ramble, it's going to be kind of hard for me to make a very carefully made constructed video like the SAO ones anytime soon. Actually, another thing I wanted to mention here, in terms of actual development plans, right now I'm looking at spending the first 1 or 2 years right now, or I'm really looking at just dividing things into stages, but the first 1 or 2 years are going to be the first stage. Guys, I'm only working off of a warehouse worker's wages. I'm barely making enough to cover my own stuff, as well as keep and manage my own social life. I'm actually kind of positive right now, since I just got my new passport in, so I might be able to buy my plane ticket pretty soon to go to Japan with a friend over in around November for our vacations. So yeah, definitely gonna have some fun there. But yeah, I still want to be able to keep things somewhat balanced, since one of the things I kind of regret doing for a while there was just purely and utterly focusing myself on some of my hobby projects in virtual reality, technology, gaming, and all that kind of stuff, without really trying to enjoy my own life. So yeah, guys, I want to make sure that I kind of keep things in a balance. And to do that, I'm going to try to take my time with this. Once school starts, I'm going to try to focus on that. If I see areas where I can shove or mix them together, I'll try to. But I don't want to overwork myself, since life is pretty long and there's no real rush to this thing, since virtual reality industry has already made it clear that they're not in much of a rush either. So, hey. Well, everyone, I'm kind of just rambling on here again. So, yeah, for the first 2 parts of development, since I'm kind of broke and don't want to overspend on virtual reality, I want to spend on my life as well as college and all that, I'm mostly going to spend this first year or two prototyping and designing things on paper. You're going to see a lot of design documents, a lot of study videos, like analyzing the leg and all that, since I want to start off with just maybe like my leg and ankles or that kind of a region first as a scale model, to see whether or not the things and the principles I have in mind work. That way I can start moving on to primary development and see where I may need help here or where I'm going to have to work here, and just to get a general idea of what the workflow is going to be like. So more or less that's what I'm looking at right now. The first 2 years are going to be spent just on design. And by the way guys, when I say design, I mean like I'm going to go very deep into this. Most of the videos that you see on this channel, I mostly just kind of pass over on the specs area or the very minute specs. I go over the broader ideas. I really can't afford to do that with this kind of a rig, so I'm going to be looking at getting some more accurate measurements and units going into here. So we're going to have exact grams, voltages, amps, frequencies, and everything down to a formula once it's all done. So in theory, if you guys really wanted to, you might be able to follow along and maybe even build your own version of this rig, although I must admit this is probably going to be a very advanced user kind of a thing. I don't really expect anybody who's just going to be going through scripts or just trying to pick something off of the shelf to be able to really follow through with this, since even I myself in my current stage, I personally believe that the final rig that's going to be available, my current self as I am right now with the knowledge I have cannot build that rig. It's only going to be through the learning and development I do in the process of making and these videos and keeping up with everything and learning and researching that I'll finally be able to reach the point where I can finish everything and make what I want to make. But yeah guys, it's going to be a very big trial, and I'm hopeful that it'll work out all in the end. Since guys, my biggest thing I'm a virtual dreamer. I dream virtually. I want things in a I want to accomplish this dream. This is the big thing I want. So I want to make sure I do all this to the best of my ability with everything I've got, especially since I've come to the conclusion that the industry isn't going to give it to me if I wait around. So yeah guys, this is the beginning of something somewhat big, somewhat weird, somewhat crazy, somewhat misguided, and well, somewhat fun if you ask me. So yeah guys, thank you very much for watching this video. This has been Marcus Stahl, logging out.